Because obviously, paper thin, the angle is this, right? When I got the Achilles one on, that was actually mainly sort of like what I was alluding to there. It was mainly just to have an excuse to talk about cool things that generally people in Valorant might not know about Koreans. Like, they might not know about League of Legends angle and the history of the game and like the way they practice and the mentality and the coaching staff and all these interesting sort of weird little details and peccadillos and idiosyncrasies. But now, actually, after the last VCT, dude, I think for real, like, we actually have to have a convo that I want to start the episode with of, is DRX, who are the best Korean team, are they actually a contender to win the event? Because with how wide open the last Masters event was, they were also a team that people think's like a promising team. I notice people often rave about some of the strategies. Where is the DRX team at? Because normally, like on the last one, Ikidos did what you have to do and sort of be like, yeah, I think if everything went well, they could do it, blah, blah, blah. Now it seems a little bit more legit, though. People all of a sudden don't look down on the minor regions, right, paper thin.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the way that, Zeta and PaperX also played, like kind of the Asia APAC region as a whole is starting to gain a lot of steam, gain a lot of respect. And I think for DRX, like, this is the best version of them I've ever seen. And I've casted just about every game DRX has played, at least since First Strike, or at least watched it very closely and been a part of it. So what's really kind of changing DRX right now is part of what made DRX so good, right, when they won like 100 and whatever 3 or 2 games it was in a row, was that they were setting their own meta, right? They were setting their own pace. Everybody was trying to learn from them because of the way they would combo utility, right? The flash and dash, that was DRX, or Vision Strikers at the time, and they were the ones who kind of pioneered some of these utility combos. So now you add Fade to the game, and this is an agent that falls right into DRX's wheelhouse. They love to combo the utility. Like, you'll see stuff like, you can Prowler, Flash, and then follow up with the Jet or the Neon or whatever. Like, a lot of times they'll use the Fade utility to set up RB on the Neon, which is another kind of interesting change they made. So what I like about DRX is they're not trying to mimic anybody else's meta. They're trying to set their own.
Okay.
Interesting. I don't think...
Was I overhyping it there? Was I gassing up the region angle there, Gio?
I don't think that they are a title contender for this event, but that's not a comment on DRX not being a good team. It's a comment on other teams being too good. I think that for me, I would have to say the favorite is Fnatic, but I think that the biggest threat to that is probably PaperX. And I think that right now, it's very hard to look at any team that is outside of the sort of EMEA NA bubble and point at any team that isn't PaperX as sort of the best potential upsetter. I mean, and even then, like, Loud could be one that come in. They obviously got to the finals in the last event as well. Although I can't say I've watched the Brazilian region, so I don't know if their sort of form has continued in just as good a shape. I will be very interested to see how DRX play, because I do think one of the points that Paperthin made there is a really interesting one, which is that when you are being a meta setter, for lack of a better term, you have a much higher opportunity to succeed, I think. And it was really interesting, actually, because I saw Yinsu, she did an interview with Aaron from XZ, so we're talking about NA here, on her YouTube channel. And one of the points that he brought up is he felt that while the meta between EU and NA is quite similar right now, a lot of teams are playing really differently compared to other eras of Valorant that we've had in the past, where a lot of teams will play a lot more similarly. So I do think those differences in being able to play off of your own strengths are probably going to be more influential in this event because of that sort of separation in how people are playing. I just think that teams like PaperX are going to be way too powerful to really give DRX a very viable look into the finals.
Well, it's kind of funny because DRX, one of their biggest scrim partners is PaperX. Like, DRX and PaperX go way back in terms of playing each other and these kind of things. And as good as PaperX is, they're really good, and I don't want to take anything away from them. DRX has their number, right? They beat them every time that they faced them at an international. From what I understand, they routinely beat them. But the weird thing is I would actually kind of agree with you that I think PaperX has more deep run potential than DRX unless they run into DRX. Like, DRX seems to just have certain teams' numbers, and this has happened in Korea. This has now happened a little bit internationally with PaperX, where they run into them in the group stages and they can't beat them. So I really like PaperX, and I don't want to take anything away from them at all because I think they're absolutely insane. Jing and Forsaken are just absolute nutters. But you're absolutely right as well that the meta in Asia is wildly different than that of NA and EU, particularly attacker-sided, right? Like, Asian teams are very much better at the attacker side, or at least they focus on that as kind of their bread and butter, as where they look to really get their damage done.
I do think also, just kind of like springboard off of that point that you just made about how things have gone in the group stages, is that PaperX, of course, are not starting in the group stage. So in order for them to face up against each other, DRX need to qualify into the playoffs. But because they're in Group B, which I think is, most people probably agree, likely to be the easier group of the two, I think they are all but guaranteed to get into the playoffs. It just depends on where that seeding is going to be ultimately.
Especially, obviously, if indeed they end up having the problems with FPX, like if they can't get some of their players in and they end up having to take subs again. It could be a Fnatic scenario from last Masters, if people remember, so that would open the door to make it through. But here's the question then, Paper Thin, right? As you say, these are two teams that directly, Rex and DRX, can directly practice each other within the region. I wonder, like, stylistically, how do they match up then? Because obviously, normally the Western teams find it like, basically, like, I think that, like, PaperX is the most scary team, it seems like, because the playing styles are so aggressive, right? How do the Koreans normally match up with that? Do they have a handle on it?
Yeah, they generally, for the most part, seem to have a pretty good read on it these days. I mean, they kind of know what to expect with some of these, really aggressive pushes down the long angles on various maps. Like, everybody remembers back at Masters 1 with the way that they would push A main, they would pressure that. And I think DRX pretty well has an understanding of when and why that's going to happen. But at the same time, DRX does struggle against teams that play like that from time to time. Reynas have given DRX fits. You see this all the time at different events where, they're kind of, if they get thrown off their game plan, if they don't have like the mental protocols in place to kind of deal with the situation, all of a sudden they start to fall apart. But if they're prepared for you, if they know what to expect from you, if they're ready for it, they're a well-oiled machine, and they seem to handle it very well. So, yeah, I mean, they know PaperX's tendencies very well just because they know each other so well, and they have a lot of respect for PaperX as well, in terms of the way they play, in terms of the caliber of players they have. But so far, it's gone DRX's way, but we'll see if that changes. I mean, this could be, I think PaperX is a team that if they catch fire, just like Zeta did at the previous tournament, they could run teams over.
Okay. I mean, it's interesting you say that, because actually I would say, painting with very broad strokes, obviously, because I'm literally generalizing, Korean teams and players in a lot of esports games I've followed, the way that they seem to learn and practice games is what you would call iterative. Like, they just get a blueprint and then they repeat it, and they try to basically refine all the small details. And essentially, a lot of the approach seems to be like a flowchart approach. Like, if A, then C, D, and you pick the options and you try to always follow the sort of the correct path, like the highest efficiency chance to succeed in the game. So I will say, if from watching lots of different esports games, that does actually seem to be the best chance you have against like the best Koreans. Because obviously in some games, Koreans are the absolute pinnacle, they're the best region or country or whatever. Basically, if you can get into scenarios where you play like a brawl style or some sort of chaotic style where you just increase the variance, and at that point in time, the key thing is this: that there isn't a perfect, you're not even trying to think like what would the perfect movie, you're just doing what you do, you react, you play off each other, etc. But if in their scenario they're so used to always, like as you say, having a protocol list that they always follow in this particular way, you can throw them off a bit, you can make them a bit uncomfortable. They definitely prefer it when, like, put it this way, Korea is the ultimate region in esports that loves that old saying of like, the greatest swordsman in the world isn't scared of the second best swordsman, he's scared of the man who's never held a sword, because he might do like a random move that you don't. Korea are the ones who want to play the second best swordsman all the time. They want to play like, this is proper like Valorant, and we play like A meets B follows C follows D. I'm sure that's why, for example, famously within their region, it's often like the right team beats the right team all the time. It's like the correct, you have the favourites winning the right, because like the underdog plays the right way to lose, but play correct Valorant. So that's why actually these are the regions that you want to look at for like the like throw them off their game in this regard. Maybe NA as well, just have style, because basically back in Counter-Strike we had some Korean teams that got very good in the old version of Counter-Strike, but that was the one area, Paper Thin, I noticed they would always fall apart. They would be good at the opening parts of the round or the basic like like everyday sort of style of like, you know, how roughly how attackers are going to play and defensive are going to play.
Right.
But the problem they would have was European teams were at the best when the round breaks. Like it becomes like a 2v2 and you're just playing off each other. And at that point, it's nothing to do with anything you know, planned in a scrim or in spawn. Like, you know, you're just playing off each other reactively. That was where they would get thrown, because in that moment, they couldn't suddenly like sort of read what the other person was doing as well, because they weren't in our region. So they weren't practicing against those players, didn't know them as well. So that is an angle. Obviously, again, very broad strokes, but I would say that is something to watch in the game. It's why I'm not surprised, by the way, like as you said earlier, I'm not surprised they came up with loads of tactical innovations and things that when you really perfect like this move, it just works mega well. That's sort of the Korean way of practicing and improving, as far as I can tell.
Well, and it's so funny you talk about, real quick, the previous like CSGO experience is because, right, like all the coaching staff for DRX are previous CSGO players, right? The We Made Fox players, right? Termi, Glow are both on that staff. And so, like, you nailed it, dude. Like, they play exactly like you're talking about. They don't know how to deal with mid-round adaptation sometimes. Like, Reyna, I would say disruptive play causes DRX issues. And so, like, M3C, right, at last year's Masters 3 in Berlin, was such a problem for them because of the way, like, Nats plays. He's so unpredictable. Reyna's caused them problem because of dismisses. So, like, the protocol in place where they try to follow up on a kill or follow up on a trade get thrown out the window because the Reynas are able to get out of those situations where they're not able to quickly trade off of it like they would like to. So I really like what you're saying. I really think you hit the nail on the head.
It's interesting as well because it makes it kind of exciting to see how DRX will face up against FPX in the group stages, because FPX are a team that really like to change things up very frequently. And so I think that that's the sort of play style and that's the sort of team that can really test and push the limits of the preparedness of DRX, right? It's like skill-wise, I think they will absolutely have the skill to make that a really worthwhile game. But in terms of like having done the drills specifically, because it's not like FPX are the sort of team who you can look at them and say, okay, they played this way in this game. This is their usual comp for this. Like, we're going to practice that, because that's not really how FPX work as a team. And so I think that even in the group stage, we could end up seeing like how much DRX are ready for that and their kind of tenacity in that sort of situation before we even reach the playoffs, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I will say, I think actually, because we had Ardis as a guest on this show way back at the beginning, I think he even said something along the lines of like, they have times in the game where like he can just do whatever he wants, basically. Like, in that scenario, how are you supposed to read what he's going to do? He doesn't know himself. He's about to figure it out, isn't he? You know?
Well, and it's tough for DRX, because if they don't know what to expect, if they're not prepared, like this is why PaperX doesn't scare me as much as some other teams, just because they played each other so much. Like they understand the tendencies and kind of like what PaperX is thinking. On paper, PaperX, like, is scary to DRX. It is the antithesis to their play style. But again, they played each other a lot. But FPX scares the crap out of me. All the EU teams scare the crap out of me because they're so good at mid-round adaptations, like you're talking about. Sometimes they just straight up don't have a plan. And if DRX isn't mentally prepared for that, they do struggle. Now, I will say one cool thing about this particular stage for DRX in the Korea region is that Termi, as a coach, has really adjusted his coaching style to a much less rigid style. He is now opening up the players to kind of let them do what they want when they want. He was taking very few timeouts. I mean, part of that is a consequence of them just at times dominating the other teams, but also he didn't want to cut in and kind of give his opinion. He wanted to make his team figure it out themselves. He wanted, Zest as the IGL to really figure these things out, figure out the mid-round adaptations, and learn how to adapt on the fly better.
Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.